Welcome to Morbid Whispers, where we explore the darkest chapters of true crime history. Today, we're diving into the chilling story of a woman whose name has become synonymous with cold-blooded murder and deception. This is the tale of Belle Gunness, the Black Widow of Porte. To her neighbors in early 20th century Indiana, Belle appeared to be a hard-working widow trying to make a life for herself and her children on a secluded farm. She was known for her kindness and hospitality, often taking out ads in newspapers seeking companionship and promising a life of comfort and happiness to those who would join her. But behind the facade of a grieving widow lay a woman capable of unimaginable cruelty. As suitors answered Belle's ads and arrived at her farm, they seemed to disappear without a trace, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and grieving families. When the truth finally came to light, the discoveries on Belle Gunness' property would shock the nation and reveal one of the most prolific female serial killers in American history. What drove this seemingly loving mother to commit such heinous acts? And what happened to Belle Gunness after her gruesome secrets were uncovered? Join us as we peel back the layers of mystery surrounding the Black Widow of Porte and explore the terrifying legacy she left behind. Belle Gunness was born Brynhild Paulsdatter Storsett on November 11, 1859, in Selbu, Norway. Little is known about her early life, but for one reason or another, Gunness decided to emigrate from Selbu to Chicago in 1881. There, Gunness met her first known victim, her husband, Mads Ditlev Anton Sorensen, whom she married in 1884. Their life together seemed to be marked by tragedy. Gunness and Sorensen opened a candy store, but it soon burned down. They had 4 children together, but 2 allegedly died of acute colitis. Eerily, the symptoms of this disease were quite similar to poisoning. And in 1900, their home burned down. But as was the case with the candy store, Gunness and Sorensen were able to pocket the insurance money. Then, on July 30th, 1900, tragedy struck again. Sorensen died suddenly of a cerebral hemorrhage. Strangely, that date represented the last day of Sorensen's life insurance policy, as well as the first day of his new policy. His widow, Gunness, collected on both policies $150,000 in today's dollars, which she could have only done on that day. But no one at the time chalked it up to anything but a tragic coincidence. Gunness claimed that Sorensen had come home with a headache and she had given him quinine. The next thing she knew, her husband was dead. Belle Gunness left Chicago with her daughters Myrtle and Lucy, along with a foster daughter named Jenny Olson. Newly flush with cash, Gunness bought a 48-acre farm in Porte, Indiana. There, she set about starting her new life. Neighbors described the 200-pound Gunness as a rugged woman who was also incredibly strong. One man who helped her move and later claimed that he saw her lift a 300-pound piano all by herself. "I like music at home," she supposedly said, by way of explanation. And before long, the widowed Gunness was a widow no longer. In April 1902, she married Peter Gunness. Strangely, tragedy seemed to return to Belle Gunness' doorstep yet again. Peter's infant daughter from a previous relationship died. Then, Peter also died. Apparently, he had fallen victim to a sausage grinder that fell on his head from a wobbly shelf. The coroner described the incident as a little queer, but believed that it was an accident. Gunness dried her tears and collected her husband's life insurance policy. Only one person seemed to be catching on to Gunness' habits: her foster daughter, Jenny Olson. "My mama killed my papa," Olson allegedly told her schoolmates. "She hit him with a meat cleaver and he died. Don't tell a soul." Soon afterward, Olson vanished. Her foster mother initially claimed that she'd been sent to school in California. But years later, the girl's body would be found in Gunness' hog pen. Maybe Belle Gunness needed money, or maybe she had developed a taste for murder. Either way, the twice-widowed Gunness began posting personal ads in Norwegian-language newspapers to find a new companion. One read, "Personal, comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in Porte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided. with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow answer with personal visit. Triflers need not apply. According to Harold Schechter, a true crime author who wrote Hell's Princess, The Mystery of Belle Gunness, Butcher of Men, Gunness knew exactly how to lure her victims onto her farm. Like many psychopaths, she was very shrewd in identifying potential victims, Schechter explained. These were lonely Norwegian bachelors, many completely cut off from their families. Gunness beguiled them with promises of down-home Norwegian cooking and painted a very seductive portrait of the kind of life they'd enjoy. But the men who came to her farm would not have a life to enjoy for very long. They arrived with thousands of dollars and then disappeared. One lucky man named George Anderson survived the encounter. Anderson had come to the Gunness farm from Missouri with money and a hopeful heart. But he awoke one night to a terrifying sight. Gunness leaning over his bed as he slept. Anderson was so startled by the ravenous expression in Gunness' eyes that he left immediately. Meanwhile, neighbors noted that Gunness had begun to spend an unusual amount of time at her hog pen at night. She also seemed to spend a lot of money on wooden trunks, which witnesses said she could lift like a box of marshmallows. Meanwhile, men showed up one by one at her door, and then kept vanishing without a trace. Mrs. Gunness received men visitors all the time. One of her farmhands later told the New York Tribune. A different man came nearly every week to stay at the house. She introduced them as cousins from Kansas, South Dakota, Wisconsin, and from Chicago. She was always careful to make the children stay away from her cousins. In 1906, Belle Gunness connected with her final victim. Andrew Helgelian found her ad in the Minneapolis Tidend, a Norwegian-language newspaper. Before long, Gunness and Helgelian began exchanging romantic letters. "We shall be so happy when you once get here," Gunness purred in one letter. "My heart beats in wild rapture for you, my Andrew. I love you. Come prepared to stay forever." Helgelian, like other victims before him, decided to take a chance on love. He moved to La Porte, Indiana on January 3, 1908 to be with Belle Gunness. Then, he disappeared. So far, Belle Gunness had been able to largely escape detection or suspicion. But after Andrew Helgelian stopped answering letters, his brother Assel got worried and demanded answers. Gunness deflected. "You wish to know where your brother keeps himself," Gunness wrote to Assel. "Well, this is just what I would like to know, but it almost seems impossible for me to give a definite answer." She suggested that maybe Andrew Helgelian had gone to Chicago, or perhaps back to Norway. But Assel Helgelian didn't seem to be falling for it. Concurrently, Gunness had begun to develop problems with a farmhand named Ray Lamphere. He had romantic feelings for Gunness and resented all the men that showed up at her property. The two once apparently had a relationship, but Lamphere had left in a jealous rage after Helgelian arrived. On April 27, 1908, Belle Gunness went to see an attorney in La Porte. She told him that she had fired her jealous farmhand, Lamphere, which caused him to go mad. And Gunness also claimed that she needed to make a will, because Lamphere had apparently threatened her life. "That man is out to get me," Gunness told the attorney. "I fear one of these nights he will burn my house to the ground." Gunness left her attorney's office. She then bought toys for her children and 2 gallons of kerosene. That night, someone set her farmhouse on fire. Authorities found the bodies of Gunness' 3 children in the charred rubble of the farmhouse basement. They also found the body of a headless woman who, at first, they assumed was Belle Gunness. Lamphere was quickly charged with murder and arson, and police began to search the farm grounds, hoping to find Gunness' head. Meanwhile, Assel Helgelian had read about the fire in the newspaper. He showed up in hopes of finding his brother. For a while, Helgelian assisted police as they sorted through the rubble. Although he almost left, Helgelian became convinced that he couldn't do so without looking harder for Andrew. "I was not satisfied," Helgelian recalled, "and I went back to the cellar and asked one of Gunness' farmhands whether he knew of any hole or dirt having been dug up there about the place in spring. In fact, the farmhand did. Belle Gunness had asked him to level dozens of soft depressions in the ground, which supposedly covered trash. Hoping to find a clue related to his brother's disappearance, Helgelian and the farmhand began to dig up a pile of soft dirt in the hog pen. To their horror, they ended up finding Andrew Helgelian's head, hands, and feet stuffed into an oozing gunny sack. Further digging yielded more grisly discoveries. In the span of 2 days, investigators found a total of 11 burlap sacks, which contained arms hacked from the shoulders down and masses of human bone wrapped in loose flesh that dripped like jelly. Authorities couldn't identify all the bodies, but they could identify Jenny Olson, Gunness' foster daughter, who had left for California. And it soon became clear that Gunness was behind some horrific crimes. Before long, news of the gruesome discovery spread throughout the nation. American newspapers labeled Belle Gunness the Black Widow, Hell's Belle, the Indiana Ogress, and the mistress of the Castle of Death. Reporters described her home as a horror farm and a death garden. Curious onlookers flocked to La Porte, as it became a local and national attraction, to the point that vendors reportedly sold ice cream, popcorn, cake, and something called Gunness stew to visitors. Meanwhile, authorities struggled to determine whether the headless corpse they'd found in the burned farmhouse belonged to Gunness. Although the police found a set of teeth among the ruins, there was still some debate as to whether or not they belonged to Belle Gunness. Curiously, the corpse itself seemed to be much too small to be hers. Even DNA tests that were done decades later, from envelopes that Gunness licked, were unable to definitively answer if she had died in the fire. In the end, Ray Lamphere was charged with arson, but not murder. "I know nothing about the House of Crime, as they call it," he said when asked about Gunness murders. "Sure, I worked for Mrs. Gunness for a time, but I didn't see her kill anybody, and I didn't know she had killed anybody." But on his deathbed, Lamphere changed his tune. He admitted to a fellow inmate that he and Gunness had killed 42 men together. She would spike their coffee, bash their heads in, cut up their bodies, and put them in sacks, he explained. "Then, I did the planting." Lamphere ended up in prison because of his connection to Gunness and the fire on her farm. But did Lamphere actually cause the fire? And did Gunness really die in the farmhouse disaster? Years after Gunness' supposed demise, rumors surfaced that she may have faked her own death to escape potential capture. Or perhaps she simply wanted to be free to kill again. Eerily, in 1931, a woman named Esther Carlson was arrested in Los Angeles for poisoning a Norwegian-American man and attempting to steal his money. She died of tuberculosis while awaiting trial, but many couldn't help but notice that she bore a striking resemblance to Gunness, and even had a photograph of kids who looked a lot like Gunness children. It remains unconfirmed when and where Belle Gunness actually died. As we close the chapter on the terrifying story of Belle Gunness, the Black Widow of La Porte, we're left to reflect on the darkness that can lurk behind a seemingly ordinary life. Belle's tale is one of greed, deception, and a chilling disregard for human life. Under the guise of a caring mother and a widow looking for love, she lured countless victims to their untimely deaths, driven by a ruthless desire for money and control. Even today, the true extent of Belle Gunness' crimes remains shrouded in mystery. How many men fell victim to her lethal charms? What really happened in the final days before her house burned to the ground? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, did Belle Gunness actually escape, vanishing into the shadows to begin her reign of terror anew? While we may never have all the answers, the story of Belle Gunness serves as a grim reminder of how easily trust can be manipulated and how appearances can be deceiving. Her legacy endures as one of America's most enigmatic and chilling serial killers, a woman whose name still evokes fear and fascination more than a century later. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the dark past. If you found this story as haunting as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more tales from the shadows. Until next time, stay vigilant. And remember, sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who seem the most human.